Hello, I'm Michael Depp, editor of TVNewsCheck, and I'm with Glen Dickson, contributing editor to TVNewsCheck, and we are talking TV. Talking TV is made possible by Making the Media, a podcast from Avid, exploring the forces that shape the media, news, and entertainment business. The latest episode focuses on the streaming technology Secure Reliable Transport, or SRT. Host Craig Wilson interviews Peter Mogg from Haivision, the company which invented SRT. Mogg explains the background to the technology, the workflows it supports, the work they are doing in the cloud, and the future direction for SRT. Making the Media is available on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor FM, and other podcast platforms.
Hello there, Michael.
Hi, Glenn. Welcome. It's been a while since we've had you on. Good to see you.
Yeah, same here.
So, Glenn, last week you did a story for us on the cancellation of the NAB show in October, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. That cancellation was a little bit last minute, and while it wasn't a complete surprise, it still does feel like a considerable blow to the industry. For the vendors who were still planning to attend at that point, I know many had dropped out, but for those who were still attending, what was the impact for them? What did they feel?
Well, some of them had, definite impact in terms of having put together booths they wouldn't have put together. A few vendors had actually shipped booths to Vegas, which now they have to look at storing between now and when the next show is scheduled to happen in April. And, obviously a lot of planning for presentations and such on the booth. Now, a couple of vendors said to me they'll be able to repurpose some of that stuff. And, frankly, everyone's been operating in the COVID world for so long. They weren't just planning physical Vegas-based announcements, everything. Most people were thinking about some virtual component, and then they ramped that up. I think a lot of the international manufacturers, European-based manufacturers, Japanese-based manufacturers, had sort of made the decision that it was going to be a scrap, kind of a pared down exhibition for them a ways back. I didn't get into this granular detail in the story, but the Sony executives were telling me if there was anything that was a new product or a technology that only had a couple subject matter experts in it, that was something that they were planning to deliver via PowerPoint several months ago. When they still thought maybe people from Japan might be able to make the trip, but you were worried about somebody testing positive or something last minute happening. And then, obviously they got to the point along with some other Japanese manufacturers where, they weren't going to be able to get people in the country. You saw Sony pulled out of Infocom as well in Orlando, which is a big show, which is still going on. For the North American vendors, folks like Grass Valley, they were happy to do it and support it with North American staff, even though they were expecting, a greatly reduced show. It's kind of crazy. I've gone to a lot of NABs, and I remember when it was a legit 100,000 people there, and I don't think I've ever been at one that was less than a legit 80,000 something. Mm-hmm. And when Grass Valley executives said, we were thinking, if it was 20,000 people who showed up, that was a viable North American show for us to be at. But that's pretty glaring difference. One of the points that I talked about with the vendors, and we just kind of chuckled about it, is NAB made a lot of noise back in May of 2019 with changing the schedule of the show and moving the exhibit window. Had always been Monday through Thursday. A lot of vendors have complained that Thursday was, tumbleweeds down the hallways. People were gone, and they thought they could get some more weekend traffic, so they moved up the exhibition Sunday through Wednesday, and moved some conference things forward. With the idea that they might get weekend traffic like the IBC show does, and there were a lot of people who
people coming out from LA for just driving out ahead of time.
Yeah, I've had some vendors. Some vendors said, well, there's not really. If you're serving broadcast groups, there's not that many that are based in LA anymore. But I do think NAB was courting more of Hollywood entertainment market, streaming platforms like Netflix. Obviously, the lion's share of creative community for entertainment-based stuff is still in LA. So that was the thought, but. The point I made to people is like, no one will ever know if that was a good idea or not. Because if NAB happens in 2022, and it goes ahead in April, and you get, 50,000 people, it doesn't mean that was a bad idea. You've now had 2 years where people have gotten used to the concept of not going to NAB. And, and the world keeps moving on, and people continue to buy new technology, maybe vetting it remotely, and vendors are spinning up software systems remotely, and new facilities have come up. So
and habits reset. So
yeah.
So you brought up Grass Valley a moment ago. They told you in the story that they don't ever see a return to what they call the product supermarket style show floors of the past. So why, and what's going to be in their place then instead when the show does eventually resume?
Yeah, well, it's funny. The first reason before anything happening with technology is just ROI. I've written several stories in the past about how much vendors were spending on NAB, how expensive it was from an exhibit floor point of view, how much they spent for drayage, shipping, electricians to set up. The union contracts were very expensive in Vegas, and NAB, to its credit, has done a lot. The vendors all reported to me to try to bring down some of those costs, but it's just something overall that the ROI was diminishing. Just based on these companies' overall revenues diminishing for a lot of them, the businesses. So that was having at a top line, and then you have a very big systemic shift in the product mix to software products that you don't need racks of cameras or racks of equipment or big switchers that people are sitting at, because a lot of the switchers that people are putting in the newest television facilities are virtualized, and there's people at a touchscreen interface or monitor. They got a mouse. They're not sitting in front of a big board. So that cuts down a lot of the booth space you need. And the other thing, and I think probably the webinars, virtual events people have done have maybe highlighted this. The marketing guys can sometimes get more ROI for their companies by focusing on speaking opportunities, participating in the conference. That was, one of the marketing executives at Grass Valley, made that comment. We're really focused on that. And he said, we've kind of given those short shrift in the past because we've been so focused on getting ROI out of this big, expensive booth. Mm-hmm. That we kind of overlooked the conference. But it is interesting, in regards to the costs and in regards to the technology shift. I remember writing a story about this back in 2016 about what was happening with NAB and booth sizes coming down. And I quoted a very smart guy named Larry Kaplan, who founded a software company, SDVI, but he had worked for traditional vendors like Sony in the past, and he had made a prediction back then that NAB was going to wind up being like 3 halls. You'd have one hall with all the big IT companies that were making the blade servers and stuff, because people weren't really talking about cloud as much then. So there are people like Cisco, supporting these IP-based facilities. And then a specialty hall of things that you still need to show hardware, cameras, the newest lenses, pieces, gizmos that people are still using in production. And then another hall was just a bunch of card tables with smart guys with laptops showing their latest applications.
Mhm.
And, a lot of that vision is sort of coming to fruition, maybe not for the reasons that he, initially thought, because the biggest vendors in terms of booth size this year, a lot of them were the cloud companies. I mean, that's sort of the interesting thing. Probably the company that least needs to show physical hardware because you don't even care about it. It's a service, Amazon Web Services. They were going to have one of the bigger booths. So that's interesting. But that notion of the card tables, he wasn't wrong about that. And now COVID has shown the power of doing stuff virtually, doing stuff remotely. It's emphasized. And I talked to a couple executives. We were talking to some of the truck vendors, mobile truck vendors, who go to NAB every year. And April, another point in terms of attendance. October is a horrible time for sports guys. That was universally agreed upon. You're a month into NFL. Baseball playoffs are starting next week. And then you have, NHL season starting up at the end of the month, and NBA is already in preseason. So a really bad time for those guys to go. But, when NAB was canceled back in 2020, one of the sports vendors said, for us, it's been great. I've had my guys doing a series of webinars with the executives from people like Sony and Grass Valley and EBS. And I'm getting 20 guys together in a room and they get an hour-long briefing. And if we were at the show, we would be hanging around, a top executive product development guy from Sony who's showing us the latest camera with, 40 other hangers on trying to barge in. It's loud, it's noisy. It's crowded. So, talking to vendors now, it's a year and a half now that we've gone through this cycle of virtual stuff. And, there has shown a lot of benefit.
This is painting a very ominous portrait here for the future of in-person events of that scale.
Well, there is a flip side to it, though, which is interesting. A couple of vendors made this point to me. If work from home, it does stay as permanent as, at least for part of the work week.
Certainly hybridized we pretty much know.
Yeah, right. And if that is the case, then you can make the argument that that puts more importance on at least the gathering, the social gathering, networking, professional development part of shows like NAB, particularly for the groups. Several vendors made a point. It's like it's important for the vendors who have, far-flung, geographically distributed operations to get together at NAB, get the whole team together, and there's a certain power to that. But for a lot of the station groups, it's a chance to get all their engineers together and get their top executives together. And it's always been the site of, affiliate board meetings and engineers breakfasts and all that. And if you have engineers from the same call letter station who are barely seeing each other through, a calendar year because of remote working arrangements, then, it's more important that they go to NAB once a year and see their boss and a couple colleagues, and then see some new products too. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out.
So meanwhile, IBC is going forward, at least at this point, with an in-person show in Amsterdam in early December. First of all, are there any whispers or doubts around that? And secondly, do you see IBC benefiting from NAB's cancellation?
Well, there's definitely whispers and doubts, though, in terms of what's happened in terms of international restrictions on travel and such, they've had a lot of good things happen to them in the last couple of weeks. Between the Dutch government, I guess the Dutch government, as explained to me by IBC CEO Michael Krimp, he kind of walked me through it. They had been classifying conventions in terms of being big gatherings, much the same way as leisure events like concerts or sports. And, I guess enough people, including IBC, managed to lobby them, persuade them that, these conferences were an essential part of the Dutch economy. And so they had a big trade show, financial trade show, Money 2020 last week. And at the same time, the US government has come out and said, we are going to open up our borders to international travelers coming early November. I think there was a little sort of unspoken kind of quid pro quo. As long as we were banning European travelers from coming here without quarantining, a lot of European countries were feeling the same way. While within the the EU bloc, people are freely traveling. And talking to a couple of vendors from the UK, they were able to travel in Europe recently and not having to quarantine. But the thing is, those two shows are basically flipped in terms of attendance. NAB's traditionally been, 70% North America, 30% international. IBC has been 70% European, 30% the rest of the world. You talk to them about numbers, so they're immediately expecting the show to, they were expecting the show to be 30% down until these travel restrictions went away. That seems like a very high, optimist. Obviously, you're going to have some subset of that 70% who would normally attend because there's still COVID going on. And you still have a depressed broadcast technology marketplace, and you still have, broadcasters who've lost a lot of advertising in the last couple of years and a whole bunch of other factors. But, if things track the way they do, I know I talked to some, executives from Sinclair who at this point were planning to go to IBC. There are a number of top executives from North America who've always attended IBC. And if things track well with COVID over the next couple of months, those folks will probably still make the trip. And I know the guys from Sony, though they said they weren't going to exhibit at IBC, some of their senior executives were planning to go as well. I don't think IBC gets more. First off, just from a logistics standpoint, there's no one today or last week or the week before when NAB called it who said, "Hey, NAB's not happening. Let's go to IBC." Things don't move that fast.
Yeah.
And so I don't think they're getting any additional bump. They might get some vendors who were on the fence to follow through with their plan to exhibit IBC. But you're talking about a show with, I think they had 650 exhibitors at last count. They usually have about double of that. But it's still a significant show. I think it was a couple 100,000 square feet of exhibit space. And
well, let me flip it back to NAB. What about the impacts of this cancellation for NAB itself? I mean, the cancellation of the second show in a row has got to be pretty brutal to their bottom line. So are we seeing any signs coming of a smaller NAB organization itself on the other side of this great event that we're in?
I haven't seen that yet, but then again, I didn't have the privilege of speaking to any of their executives, including the show organizer, Chris Brown, or any other folks in person to ask those questions. I did get some questions answered via email. I will say from years of covering the organization, that is out of character for them. I've certainly written critical stories about NAB and their finances in the past, and then they always, answered the bell and answered the questions. But we'll see. I did have a couple of vendors say to me that NAB is in much better financial footing than IBC in terms of being able to weather this most recent show getting canceled. And, a couple of vendors said, it's essential for IBC for that show to happen. Now, I asked Michael Crimp that question, and, he said we have contingency plans, and he did not say that, IBC not happening in December meant the death of their organization, So I did have him on the phone for a nice long chat, and he didn't really answer that question either. But we'll have to see. NAB, probably like a lot of other organizations in Washington, there's probably layers that could be removed, but that remains to be seen.
Okay, let me flip topics while I've got you here, Glenn. One last thing. Last week, you hosted a panel at our TV 2025 virtual conference about next gen TV. The conversation seemed to pick up a lot of momentum around the revenue potential for targeted advertising there. I wonder, are we at a turning point on the next gen monetization front? Is there finally a change in the weather there, or was I just perceiving a lot of enthusiasm without substance, perhaps?
Well, we'll see. What has happened in the last couple of years is that streaming, OTT advertising has become a more important business to all the networks and to some of the groups too. And there's been progress in that. And a lot of that same core technology is getting leveraged in the ATSC 3.0 next gen TV standard. And the sets are rolling out probably, the industry, the broadcasters working together with the consumer electronics guys, they did do a good job of branding it. Next gen TV is easy to swallow. It's kind of, consumers seem to get it from the early focus groups and stuff they've done. And, there are big manufacturers rolling out a lot of sets with the capability.
A lot more sets than ever before, it seems, according to Ann Shelley from Pearl TV, at least.
Yeah, it's going fast. I think they're looking at it being, I guess saying that I think it was 75% of sets would have that capability in a couple of years. I mean, one thing that's helped them in the near term is that because of this global supply chain issue in general, electronics guys, the set makers have been kind of pushing their highest end models because they just can't get enough parts. So if you can only get so many, IC drivers and processor chips and all this other stuff, put them in the sets that you make the most margin on, which tend to be the bigger, higher end models. And that's a lot of what you've seen from LG and Samsung. Now, Sony, to their credit, they have next gen capability across all their current TV models, which is a big thing. And I think, and Shelley hinted in that panel that there might be some more manufacturers coming on the new year. Right. If Chinese manufacturers start making sets of next gen TV in them, then there'll be a ton of volume, because that's basically the volume. If they go into volume, mid to low tier LCD sets, the kind of sets where no one really makes any money, people sometimes lose money on the glass, then there'll be a lot of sets out there. But the point that Sean was making on the panel was that there is NBC, going to be a universe out there that can be addressed with stuff that NBC is already doing today and other broadcasters are already doing today. And so we'll see. The thing that I historically been skeptical about with the targeted ad business, and that we got some comments on that story online, is about the notion of it's a two-way system in 3.0, but the back channel back to the broadcaster and back and forth between the set that's one-to-one is a broadband pipe, and that broadband pipe is paid for by the consumer, but paid for usually to a cable operator. Usually it is a multi-channel program video distributor, somebody like Comcast, somebody like Spectrum. It's not somebody who's just a straight broadband provider. Sometimes that's the case. Right. And if somebody, so I've always been skeptical that they could do a really good targeted ad business, which would basically be going right at the core of what cable's always said they've been able to do. And Comcast or any other cable operator doesn't want some slice of the pie, whether that comes out as a chunk of ad sales, whether that comes out as some concession in the next round of retrans agreements, we'll see. Now, the broadcasters, to their point, their credit, they say, well, if it's somebody who's an over-the-air home with a connected TV, it's their broadband connection, and it's really a net neutrality issue to do anything with that content that's delivered. And once they opt in to get targeted ads, the cable operator, if Comcast is just selling a broadband service, they can't mess with it. I don't know how that will shake out, but that premise is probably a lot more viable today, particularly post-COVID, than it was 2 or 3 years ago, because you do There is more cord cutting. It hasn't. That's been steady, and I don't have the latest numbers on cord cutting in my head, but that trend hasn't gone away. At the same time, streaming has taken off, and there's a lot more people watching the same kind of programming through streaming. So the notion, and at the same time, you see the cable operator subscriber rolls going down. So, that notion of it's a smart TV that gets over-the-air service, doesn't get basic cable service, and is connected via broadband to get a whole panoply of streaming video services. That was far-fetched, 5 years ago, 8 years ago. Who is that person who's got the money to buy that fancy TV, but they don't spend money on cable? That's not as far-fetched anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the way the world is slowly going, and that's why you have all these programmers, some of whom are owned by big cable companies like NBC Universal, investing in their own streaming services to basically take the same stuff they already show on air and package it differently. Everybody's got a plus, right?
Well, with additional that's there's more to it than that, but yes, take the point. Well, yeah. Obviously, this is a story we're going to follow because it's got developments to come imminently. Glenn, thank you so much. You got a story next week coming up on the World Series technology, so looking forward to that. And thanks for being here today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, go Yankees.
Cheers. A new episode of Talking TV is available most Fridays on TVNewsCheck.com. You can also listen and subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and Spotify. Talking TV is edited by Alyssa Wesley. The music is by Andrew Melenda, and it's produced and hosted by me, Michael Depp. Talking TV is a production of TV News Check.